Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending where you are in the world. Blessings and greetings. Thank you for being with us. Yeah, just a little bit of housekeeping before we start, that we ask everyone to mute their computers or their phones or whatever you're on. There was some background noise when the music was playing. And I'm just going to look at the circle of squares that we are in the Zoomiverse. And yeah, honor all of your beings and your time, and for being with us on a Friday in the midst of late stage capitalism and bedlam. So we're gonna have a beautiful discussion today with our brother Bayo, who will introduce shortly. We also have our sister Alixa with us, who will introduce before she does her piece. And in the meantime, I'm going to give it to Lynn, who's just going to situate us. This is the fifth webinar, the final webinar in the series for the book, Post Capitalist Philanthropy, Healing of Wealth in the Time of Crisis. So Lynn, I'm going to give it to you.
Hello, good day, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, all my relations, all of you here with us today, with whatever place this moment finds you in. I am having some lovely technological challenges with these beautiful devices that we have, so pardon any glitches from the outset, and thank you for the grace. And with that, I wanted to just situate us, and this is the fifth of our, the final in this particular webinar series. And just to kind of remind us of the arc that we've been in and situate the inquiry we're going to open into today, is the first one we started with just a overview of the lines of exploration that we did in here's the book that we haven't really referred to so directly so much. And a few times people have written and said, oh, there's a book. So we thought to remind that we decided, instead of doing a quote unquote book launch or a book tour, that better to listen to other wisdom keepers, because these were not just the ideas of Alnoor or me. They weren't our ideas. They were actually a synthesis of a number of different inquiries that we're weaving together to find our way in these times. So the first one, we kind of outlined the key inquiries, and then we went into ontologies of separation. And we had two wonderful guest speakers with us, Vandana Shiva and Rupa Mara, who were with us to explore that. And then we went into exploring what is it to hospice modernity itself, and the necessity for us to really look at the house of modernity. Sometimes we refer to this as late stage capitalist modernity as one of the structures, or neoliberalism. And we had Vanessa Andreatti and Tiokasin Ghost Horse with us offering up wisdom. And then we had this wonderful flip as we felt into the emergence of our time, and knew that the next webinar was to be on living transition pathways. So as we're invoking, what is it that walks us out of these systems of domination and exploitation as we stay with the trouble? What is it actually to embrace a transition pathway into the unknown? And so we had three speakers with us last time: Pat McCabe, we had Ashish Kothari, and Mara I. Larasi, really give us what they felt were these ways of living another ontology with the expressed work of living transition pathways. And so that brings us to the fifth inquiry, which is what we've said, gesturing towards post-capitalist realities. And in that way, we're invoking other ways of seeing and being, knowing, sensing, kind of sitting in what it is to live and praxis these onto shifts.
So now what we're going to do, this is where we were building up to, Danielle, in terms of like,
Yeah, sorry. If everyone who joins can just mute their computers and phones when they join.
So before we dive into this, because this is the last in the webinar series, Alnoor just put some links in the chat for us all to the book itself, to the ideation page where we put some of the other podcasts or we're going to be writing a series of op-eds. There's other things that are coming out. And then the YouTube channel has all the previous webinars, and we'll have this one as well. And so there'll be more to go into, and we're planning to do, once some of the op-eds are out, we'll do a maybe one or two, we'll see webinars specifically for philanthropy, for the so what and the praxis of going into kind of the transition pathways, and maybe get a little wonky with some of that, with some of the philanthropoids out there in this Zoomiverse. And we have a couple talks that are coming up. Maybe if Adam has, I don't know if he's on, but we could put links, or it'll come through the final email that we send out. And we just want to express the deep gratitude to all of those who've been with us in this journey and who've stayed present. So for today, we're going to have kind of a discussion with Bayo, and we'll ask some questions and see what comes. And in the way that we like to practice an emergent field, we'll see what comes from that. And then we'll have some time for questions with you all, whether it's for today or anything that has come up and that you're sitting with from this webinar series. And then we intend to actually do a practice together of an onto shifts and see what comes. And in that way, then we'll have Alixa come in and offer us another way of being in the practice of onto shifts, with bringing the beauty of art and spoken word and poetry into the space. And then we have a way to close together, to what we're invoking in this one, to walk together into the unknown. So as we've said, if you could just keep yourself on mute and find yourself in a comfortable space and find presence as whatever comes up, as we sit with embodied cognition and the door of mystery. Just notice if something comes up that's uncomfortable, or if you numb out, if you have a hard time listening, if you feel agitated or activated or inspired. This is just all information for how we're finding our ways in these times. So with that, I'm going to pass it back to my beloved brother Alnoor to situate us in the reminder of what in the world are we talking about, gesturing towards post-capitalist, what realities, what brings us to the Zoomverse today.
Beautiful. Thank you, Lynn. Yeah, so the theme for today originally was just emergence. We held it open, and we ended up switching out Bayo, who was going to be with us in the last conversation in March, and then decided it made more sense to bring him in today. And the theme is gesturing towards post-capitalist realities. And we say gesturing towards partly because we're not insinuating that there's going to be some neat and tidy transition with linearity and fixity, and that we're going to move from neoliberalism to whatever comes next as if it's going to be another monoculture, but actually to create transition pathways to many ways of knowing, being, seeing, sensing, relating with the world, a pluriverse of ontologies. And when we talk about post-capitalist realities, we're also not talking in a temporal sense. There's no dash between post and capitalism, and Bayo and I have actually had many discussions about this in the why, and he's going to talk a bit about his conceptions around post-activism, which has a lot of overlap. But we use it in the sense that, for example, the academic world talks about postmodernity, which is informed by modernity, as opposed to some temporal state that comes after. And so there's a line in the book that says, if you do not have a critique of capitalist modernity, you are contextually irrelevant. But if all you have is a critique, you're spiritually and creatively impoverished. So the first part of that is to the new age and to the bypassing impulse in all of us. If we do not understand the context we're in, the water that we swim in, we are contextually irrelevant. As the old line in the Vedas goes, if you don't know you're in the Kali Yuga, if you don't know you're in the Dark Ages, you're of no use to the Kali Yuga, to the time you incarnated in. And the second part of that line is really to the left. If all you have is a critique, you are spiritually incredibly impoverished. And so the question we bring to the center today is, how do we create embodied cultures of transition? And how do we live the onto shifts, the ontological shifts? And again, for those who haven't been with us, by ontology, what we're referring to is the isness of the world. Onto is the Greek prefix for being. And so sometimes it's also interpreted as vision. So how we see, relate, dissect, interact with the world, or interact with the world. So I think that's enough of a preamble. I'm going to bring Bayo in, and maybe Laura, we can also put Bayo in the center with Lynn and I. Oh, there he is. Nice to see you, Bayo. Thank you for being with us. And I'm going to do just a brief intro on Bayo, and I'm going to try not to make him feel awkward and you know, read some formal biography that calcifies his identity into stuck forms and titles and all of that. But I met Bayo, I think it was 2014 in New York, at a localization conference that our dear sister and elder Helena Norberg Hodge was putting on. I was just on my way to South Africa. I was moving to South Africa. I wasn't even planning on being there. And I literally, the only talk I caught was Bayo's. And as soon as I heard him speak, I knew that there was going to be some entanglement between us, and that my spores were in service to his spores. And it's too intimate for Bayo. Yeah, and we've just been, we used to have a very deep intellectual relationship, and now it's just degraded into taking the piss and talking about sci-fi. That's the there's more to it than that, I'm sure, Bayo, but you know. And so Bayo was an academic. I guess he's a recovering academic. And he, it's hard to even describe, but I would say he's a poet, a philosopher. He has a background in clinical psychology. He has a PhD from Covenant University in Lagos in Nigeria, where he's originally from. He comes from a Yoruba family. And in many ways, he's an incarnation of a Yoruba trickster deity. And I'm always in gratitude for his incarnation and coming into material form. And there's few people I love more than Bayo. And there's few people that trigger me more than Bayo, and the beauty and the honor of being entangled. And right now he's a senior fellow at the Othering and Belonging Institute at the University of California, Berkeley. He's the co-founder of the Emergence Network, where I have the honor of being entangled with Bayo as well, and a group of trickster misfits. He puts on a beautiful writing course that I highly recommend, called We Will Dance with Mountains. And it's not a writing course, it's a course on animism and new ancient emergent ways of being in the world and seeing the world. And he's the author of These Wilds, and a new book is coming out, which I believe is called The Times Are Urgent, Let Us Slow Down, which is an African proverb that Bayo occasionally takes credit for saying. No, I'm kidding. He does not. But lots gets projected on our brother. So part of what I want to do today is also protect him from the projection field, and ask that when we engage, especially in the questions, that we bring in this kind of Arabic notion of adab, which is comes from al-adab, which is etiquette, but not in the idea of European etiquette and how you cut your asparagus or what have you, but divine etiquette, cosmic tact. That there's one of us here having a distributed cognitive spiritual experience, and there is also a Bayo non-dualistically. And so to honor his body and his beingness and his isness, and not project guru on him or not vilify him at the same time, you know, he doesn't need our respect or our disrespect, is to treat him like a co-god, becoming self-aware and reminding us of things we already know. And he may do it more eloquently and more poetically than at least me. And I honor him for that, and love you, brother, and good to have you with us.
Mhm.
And maybe you just start, Bayo, and we put some things on the table already around post-capitalist realities, around ontological shifts, around the healing of wealth in the time of crisis. And yeah, maybe you can weave with the pieces that are on the table already.
Right. Well, thank you, brother. We call a truce between us for this, at least for the duration of this. So we'll put down our swords and make happy. And I want to also greet my sister, Lynn. Thank you so much, sister, for being the grounding force here. Where Alnoor is unable. No, I said we were going to call a truce. So I'm going to speak nice. Okay, so speak nice. But I greet everyone and thank you for having me. I'm in Hamburg, Germany at the moment. Alnoor called it the Germanic Empire a while ago, which makes sense. There is a sense of Christian triumphalist attitudes woven into the city that I'm in, which is interesting, but that's another conversation. I thought I would start out by saying that I think today we need some kind of ontological mutiny, that some break from the way things are convened continually. Alnoor, you're just speaking about shifts, and I speak in terms of explosions and what flashes up and ruptures and breaks and fissures. Maybe I could frame it this way briefly before I invite Alnoor into conversation, and Lynn. Did anyone here read the IPCC report recently? The 6th iteration of assessment report came out in March. Anyone here? Just raise your hands. Okay. My brother Jozo, James, I can see your hands up. Okay, thank you, thank you. I can't see everyone on my screen, of course. Emily, thank you. And my big brother that I'm so happy to see again, Feroz, we have to see, okay? I'm so happy you're here. Of course you read it. In fact, I'm surprised you didn't write it. But yes, interesting document. It seems that at the heart of the modern project is this scripting of a story, this modern story, this epic about limitations and loss and the unforeseen and unanticipated boundaries and borders of our expansive project, our desire for exquisite permanence, the desire for continuity without impediments. And I met some of the people who wrote and were part of this, the part of the scribes that wrote this document. The UN Secretary General responded to that report by saying, here is a story that feels pertinent today, and we all can do something about it. It's, he used the phrase climate time bomb or something like that. That there's a bomb and it's about to go off. We can, if we decide to, rush in and save the day, right? We can rush in, save the day, and probably meet our global targets for 1.5 degrees Celsius, all of that. I have some questions about that document, and this is how I would like to situate this idea of mutiny and post-activism and gesturing towards desires beyond the capital. I feel that the bomb has already gone off. That this isn't something to do. This isn't a Die Hard sequel, right? That invites us to rush in and save the day, which invites hero narratives. I feel that this calls for more than a solution, more than a futural gesture. This calls for us to pay attention to the ways that we are imbricated with the histories of loss, with the histories of slavery, with the histories of excavation and poisoning, and all the ways that we are part of a world and not outside of it. I feel that the world is calling us into some kind of postural arrangement that disturbs the idea that we're independent of it and can externally fix it, right? So this is what I mean when I speak about mutiny. I'm speaking about breaks. I'm speaking about what my elders would say when they say that in order to find your way, you must become lost. I'm speaking of errancy, right? I've been using this figure, not a metaphor, a figure, the figure of, it's an entomological figure. In entomology, the study of ants, insects. There is a phenomenon called the death spiral. And I don't know if anyone here has seen one. It's an ant death spiral. So if you know anything about ants, they use pheromonic, which is a semiochemical secretion from their bodies. They use this for cartographical uses. They use pheromones to find their way. They use pheromones to give instructions to each other, right? There's a particular cluster of the ant kingdom called army ants, part of the species. And they're blind. They're totally blind. The way they find their way is pheromones. And so they're tethered close to each other and they guide themselves in a very disciplined, almost military-like linearity to teach them where to go. Oftentimes, something goes wrong. Now, I don't know if any of you, when you were kids, stuck your foot in an ant playground or colony and disrupted your path. Feroz, you did that? I'm very disappointed. Very disappointed. Anyone else? Chris, Stephen, Vico, Dana? If you ever did that, you might think to yourself, well, it's just the thing to do when you feel this anthropocentric wave of power. Of course, what else to do with your foot except to disrupt poor ants on their way to the market? Except you may not realize it, but in disrupting pheromonic pathways, the pathways of pheromones, their trail, can actually disrupt how they show up in the world, how the bodily forms they take. So that in a sense, pheromones and pheromonic trails are attached to the morphology of ants, because disrupting it would instruct the queen on how to shape the next generation of ants. Maybe bigger mandibles or bigger heads. It's just to tell you that cartography is entangled with morphology. How we move through the world is how our bodies behave and how we show up in the world. It's not that bodies move, it's that movement becomes embodied, right? Modernity and its sticky premises insists that we are first eyes, right? The eye that moves, the eye that has a name, the eye that is a self. So the eye precedes movement. But we're learning in scandalous, promiscuous ways how there's this whole movement that precedes the eye. In other words, cartography, orientation becomes embodied. Now, back to the entomological example. Oftentimes, something goes wrong. Maybe Chris has done something, stuck his foot in an ant party or festival or carnival or conference. And then they start to go around in circles. And they're unable to stop. They just keep going round and round in circles, following each other in this pheromonic carcerality. They're unable to break out. No one has ever observed an ant breaking out of that circle. Imagine being an ant and you're telling yourself, we're just about to arrive. Take the next right turn. The next right turn, we're home. The next right turn, we're home. But you keep going around in circles. Eventually, they get exhausted and they die in the circle. Now, you might say to yourself, this has nothing to do with us brilliant, humans. But there is a sense in which we're stuck as well. There is a sense in which we keep on doing the same things, reminding ourselves that we're intelligent for rearranging the pieces of the text. And we keep on going around in circles. And we get exhausted. and we become veterans, and we hold webinars, and then we don't know where to go. So I'm looking for mutiny, breaks, openings. My work is about explosions that disrupt convenient continuity. COP26, COP27, COP28, COP29, Obama legislation, Biden, Paris Accords, and we just keep going round and the earth spins madly on. I'm looking for breaks. So what I call post-activism is a study of breaks, if you will. It's what Deleuze and Guattari would have called schizoanalysis, but I'll get into that when I speak with Alnoor. It's the search for desirous gesturing breaks. It's not the want of a manifesto that tells us exactly how the future is. Because if you know exactly where you're going, you might be reiterating and reinforcing the imaginative carcerality of the present. If you have every idea of where you're going, then there is a sense in which you might be trapped. This is the issue with Marxism and its analysis of capitalism. This might also be the issue with Freudianism, right? And its analysis of the schizophrenic, right? But we'll get into that soon. My question has always been, how do breaks happen? How do disruptions happen? And how do we surround disruptions? How do we stay with the breaks? Or in the words of Donna Haraway, now overly popularized, how do we stay with the trouble? Well, here's a clue. There's one way ants break away from, just one way, I think. One way ants break away from those circles. For $10,000, would anyone here like to guess? Which will come from Alnoor's pocket, because Alnoor is obviously the capitalist here. For $10,000, who would like to guess what a break in a pheromonic prison looks like? If you don't know,
$10,000?
$10,000.
All right, I'll say the smell of food.
Okay. Lynn, is that you? Is that you?
No, this is Suzanne. I'm an attendant. Thank
Susan?
you.
Okay.
Yeah. That's not
Thank
it
you
then.
so much. Thank you so much. No, there are no right or wrong answers with me. I'm too trickstery to fall into the correct answer. But someone just wrote something now that feels like a reflection of what I've said in many other places. But thank you for trying. Alnoor still owes you some money, I would say. There's something called Ophiocodiceps unilateralis. It's a fungus, and it infects ants. And when it invades an ant's body, it infiltrates it, the spores of this fungal entity infiltrates it and takes over the body of the ant, literally effectively making that ant a zombie ant, codiceps. And as it takes over the ant's body, the ant drifts away from its capture. It drifts away from containment. It literally follows, as all well-meaning and prestigious zombies do, it drifts away from its name and its function and its usefulness, right? Because it's no longer ant. It's now ant-fungus, right? And somehow this ant becomes this hybridized creature, and it goes somewhere in the forest. It digs its mandibles into the underside of a leaf and dies. And its body queers death because the body starts to do something beyond death. It's like it also carries the seed of an afterlife, right? And some kind of signal or station grows out of the ant's head, right? And that becomes a new station for sporulation and dissemination. I find that vastly intriguing. This idea that infection might break the spell of modernity. This idea that we are trapped in particular ways of doing things, and we need some kind of pairing. We need some kind of animist analysis. We need some kind of gesturing inviting our bodies to do other things in order to break out of the sensorial monoculture that is the human being a colonial territory of behaving and thinking and acting. So what does this mean? What does this look like? Well, let's get into the conversation around that. But these are my opening comments around mutiny and shifts and what post-activism is. Post-activism being not like in the beautiful sense that Alnoor articulated it. Post-activism is not after activism. It's not a dismissal of protest and struggle. It just notices how people are peopled, right? It notices that sometimes the way we respond to the crisis is actually the crisis reinforcing itself. And we need something errant. We need some kind of autistic lingering or veering away from the sites of neurotypical capture to do something different with the world. This is what the Yoruba people might call ashe. So if you've ever heard anyone say ashe, ashe, the Christianized reduction of that saying is amen. It's far from amen. This is not amen. Ashe is the invitation to the trickster to help us get lost. So you better know what you're saying when you're saying ashe. Ashe is, yes, I acknowledge that this is not up to me. This is not up to us. This is an invitation for movements beyond human doings to ally themselves with us. This is an invitation to infection. Ashe is the invitation for infections to take place. And I know that's a scandalous thing to say in a time of pandemics and viruses. But I think this is exactly what we're being called to do today. Solutions will not thrive in the times we're in. We need to become different. And the only way we become different is by letting ourselves be available for other kinds of more than human doings. I'll say more about that when Alnoor and Lynn join in.
Thank you, Bayo. And I'm going to just track and maybe project on the Occidental mind and the Western mind that is going to want to trap and reduce your poetic animistic sensibilities and your worldview to say, well, what does that mean? And therefore, what do we do? And all of the kind of linearity and fixity that comes with the Cartesian Newtonian worldview.
Yeah.
Vanessa Andreotti, whom you know well as well, with Tiokasan on the third session, said something really beautiful. She was talking about Chief Ninawa from the Huniquin people of Accra in Brazil, and his definition of coloniality. She said, or he said, coloniality is a neurobiological cultural impairment that makes us believe that we are separate from the living world, separate from other beings, human more than human, and separate from the tribe of the dead, the ancestors. Right. So it's this lens of isolation, but it's so deep. The programming of coloniality and whiteness, not as a racial construct, of course, as a social, cultural, neurological, biological, evolutionary, mimetic construct, is so deep that it's almost it's almost like the prophylactic for the infection, to become holobions, to become bions again. And so what's your, maybe, just your take on not how we overcome this, but how do we acknowledge that and the state of deep entrainment, conditioning, socialization that is whiteness and coloniality?
I often think of whiteness, and I think along those lines, Vanessa's conceptualization of capture. I am given to the idea of the slave ship as a useful way of conceiving whiteness. Whiteness is not white identified people or white identified persons or white communities or Caucasianism or something like that. Whiteness is an imperative to flatten the world to meet the needs of the fetish of modernity, which is the individual, the sterilized, individuated, finally individuated, abruptly dissociated self. And the public order, I'm staring out at the streets right now in Hamburg. The public order is the architecture of the individual, how we navigate through it, how we seek justice, how we speak truth to power, how we organize protest. These are, in many senses, forms of containment, right? I've often said that even freedom is already the banishment of the exquisite, right? There is a sense in which modernity and its containment, and by the way, when I speak of modernity, I'm speaking about its moral order, which is postmodernity. I think they're doing the same thing, right? Modernity and postmodernity are twins, like in some senses, latched around the conversation around the individual. How do we frame the individual? Is the individual default, right? Individual an act of some transcendent creator? Or is the individual switchable, right? Switchable in the sense that I can change my hair to pink, or I can change my orientation or something, or how do we frame the individual? Those are the core questions that the modern and the postmodern, battle with. What's scandalous to this entire premise is that we are not at all individuals. We're not finally individuated. That's entirely scandalous. We're monstrous. Let me take a step back. When people hear monster, we're habituated into disgust. And I find disgust emancipatory, right? But I'll say something about that later. We're habituated into closing our eyes or ears because the monster is horrifying, as it should be. The monster is a queering of the forms that we've adopted. The monster lives at the edges of civilization in our cultural stories and myth-making rituals. But it's the monster that also affords us the opportunity to shapeshift, right? It's the monster that breaks through the containment. It's the monster that allows us to become different, to see differently. So to your question, brother, I think this is about looking for and sitting with Lilith. I don't know why I chose Lilith, but Lilith we've talked about Lilith. Lilith is the mother of monsters, right? It's about seeking and staying with desires that stray away from capitalist instrumentality, like loss, like the pathos of neurodivergence. And I don't use that name or that terminology, but it's about straying away from containment. Disgust, say a few things about that. Alnoor, do you know Meti, the goddess in Greek mythology? Mm-hmm. Meti, the wife of Zeus, connives with Zeus to make some medicine that makes Cronus, the Titan, father of Zeus, who has eaten up all the Olympian gods, makes this medicine that makes Cronus vomit all the gods, right? And Cronus vomits all the gods. I find it fascinating to tell the story because Meti's name means wisdom, and the etymology of meticulous and all of that, yes. Meti means wisdom, wisdom as the herald of nausea. Wisdom's agency and gift is disgust. It's the places where we're most disgusted and uncomfortable that the work thrives. That's the impediment, right? It's if things get too comfortable, and I've had a conversation with Vanessa, and she's framed the work around toilets. Like if we frame modernity as a house, the work is in the toilet, right? It's in the places that we do, that's where the work really lies. And so I'm thinking of a politics that knows how to sit with those desirous errancies or errant desires and follows them to their conclusions without the promise or guarantee of eventual legibility or intelligibility, without the guarantee that we know where we're going. Because the point here is not to know where we're going. The point here is to get lost, as all fugitives want to do.
Beautiful. Thank you, brother. I'm gonna see if I have so much to say, and we'll continue our discussion and insults, barbarism. But I'll let Lynn ask the next question.
So I'm sitting with this, if modernity of the house is working in the toilet, and we're in the exploration of mutiny and explosion. I just wanted to bring us back to, this piece we're exploring is something to do with money or wealth. And I wanted to ask a question just to open-ended, like if we were to consider where your sense of where that, where the correlation of that, the sort of the house of modernity, the house of neoliberalism as it's applied to philanthropy, like what is it? Where do you feel like we're not yet at that moment of really navigating the disgust? Another way might be, what would you consider the money as a deity or a trickster? What would it have to say? What wisdom might it offer us right now?
I've told this story many times. Lynn, I don't know if you know my saying this, but Alnoor definitely knows about the stories of Issue, traveling with the slaves across the Atlantic. I often like to tell that story in the terms of morality and ethics. Morality is place-making ritual. It's how we plant flatness and surfaces on tempestuous and tension-ridden grounds, right? It's how we make place, and it's how we cover contradictions. We never truly cover them entirely, but it's how we create our bodies. Morality is a body-making mechanism. It's not limited to human. It's a post-human, multi-species engagement, right? But oftentimes, as has been noted, and as I've said, morality can become its own enemy, right? We get trapped in a story such as the Samudra Manthan, the Hindu mythology of the good side versus the bad side in a 1,000-year war and no one winning. And all they can do is to curdle an ocean of milk, right? We get trapped in the analysis that ends up with, so let's just be kind to each other. I resist the finality of that. I don't think kindness or compassion is the issue here. This is not to dismiss compassion, but I'm trying to notice even how morality can become a form of a trap. Because Issue, in response to the slave trade, did not respond. The trickster figure, for those of you who are just new to this very epic myth, the trickster figure did not respond with kindness. The god of war, Ogun, responded with, yes, kindness, let's save all my people. Let's win the war and chase away the European American slavers. But Issue comes with, I think there's a different path to take, a third way. Instead of victory, I will travel with them. In order to create creolized futures, we need to accompany the monstrous sometimes. And this is what Issue does. Money in the same way seems to be like a world-making mechanism. It's morality. It's how we plant and instigate algorithms for place and identity and personhood. Who gets access to what, who knows what, who does what. It's the energy of the public, right? And its energy, it's being instrumental to the continuity of the public. So that if I were to conceive of money as being enslaved and carried across Atlantic waters and a trickster stowaway being on that ship, it would be to ask, what can money do that is not instrumental to profitability? Right? What can money do that is not tethered to the myth or to the ritual of returns on investment? What can money do that allows it to become the energy of the non-legible or the unintelligible? How do we treat money, for instance, as gift, as traveling trickster? How do we treat it as impossibility? I have a few examples that I've seen and noticed in how people are gesturing towards, with the buyer beware notice that there isn't a final answer to this. There isn't any fixed answer. There's only experimentation and rehearsal. And circles that experiment with giftedness, with the idea of money doing something different, or with philanthropy saying, you know what, do this, try it. We don't want a return on investment, or we don't want a report at the end of the month telling you how you spent every dime that we gave to you, right? We want you to try something with this. That experimental Dionysian quality is exactly what the culture or subcultures across the planet need at this moment in time. If it's not experimental, then we are in trouble at the risk of repeating what we already know.
Thank you, Bayo. And that leads to maybe the last question. And then I think Lynn is going to lead us in a bit of an exercise shift. And then we'll come back. And we also want to leave time for Alixa to weave her magic. When we were doing the research for the book and we did all these interviews with cosmologists and anthropologists and funders and activists, and you said one of the lines that really struck us the most, and we put it in the book and have mentioned it before, where you said, justice will get you a seat at the table, but it'll never let you leave the house of capitalist modernity.
Yeah.
And maybe just say a little bit about that, because I think what often happens in the response is, well, it's now our time to get some. Great, this is the time of the trickster. This is the time of breakdown and renewal and tragedy and rebirth, and it's our moment as historically marginalized peoples or what have you. And something else wants to be born, and something else is being asked of us, but what is not exactly clear. And so maybe you could just say a little bit about that, and then we'll transition.
I think justice is going around in circles, right? Seeking a pathway out of the spell of continuity. For people like me, Alnoor, for Africans like me. That's a running joke between us. We don't need to spill our beans here. But for people like me, I think we're beginning to know very quickly that justice itself won't do. It didn't start with George Floyd and justice kneeling on the neck of a Black person, right? It started way back. For instance, in Nigeria, this is what we experience every day. There's no desire to put more Black people on police boards or something. We don't seek representation because we are all Black. We're all blackety Black. And yet we're still contained by forms of oppression that use assemblages to perpetuate colonial mastery. So we've not dismissed the conversation about representation and diversity. We just want something else at this point in time. So it's either we reframe justice as something exquisite we haven't yet understood or put in the lexicon, or we abandon justice altogether. And it's not an either or situation for me, or those that I have these respectful conversations with. It's more about noticing that if we are not individuated in a final sense, if we are part and parcel of ecologies that tend to pattern themselves historically in the same way over and over again, then even justice may not be the thing we're looking for, because justice is the ghost of the machine. Justice is the algorithm, the spirit of the house. Justice is the agreement that says, hey, this is where you sit. This is where you sit. Have a seat at the table, right? But I want to leave at the edges. I want my body to do other things. And for that to happen, I need to pair my body with something else that justice has no name for, right? On those slave ships, Alnoor, they had this mechanism for containing attempts at escape, right? If a slave decided to jump overboard, as you would do if you were probably part of those adventures, so to speak. Those captains installed they built these nets that surrounded the ships, and those nets were to save the slaves from jumping and ending their lives. I have nightmares about that scenario, about how safety can contribute to continuity, right? It's like we care about, they could have written on a piece of paper and stuck it to a wall on that ship and said, we care about your safety. Please stay in your quarters, right? So even safety can take on insidious meanings and significance. I think justice is doing the same thing today. It's not only figuratively and metaphorically leaning on our necks. It is that where we're going and the burden of our yearning and longing for a world that works for many and not just an isolated few, it doesn't seem the parameters of the public has the language to reach out for that undescribable world. And I'm not speaking about utopia, because even utopia fails here. This is not a utopian longing. I'm deathly scared of utopian projects. Of course, a utopian project depends on legibility. We have to have determinate parameters. I'm looking for the indescribable. And justice is the entirely legible algorithm of the city. So we need a kind of politics that isn't tethered to seeking Bernie Sanders to, as much as I love Bernie Sanders, to articulate for us free Medicare. We will need free Medicare. We will need the justice of representation. We all need some money in our pocket so we can get our groceries. But if that is all there is to this, then I fear that we're trapped. We need to move beyond critique, beyond privilege. Alnoor, I was in a situation where a sister, Black sister, was insisting on a white woman to apologize for her privilege, right? She was like, you need to show accountability for how much you have and how much you've taken onto yourself. And that became the case. The woman started to apologize. There were tears involved. And I couldn't help but notice how privilege is doing many things at once. We often think of privilege as something we have as property of selves. But even the acknowledgement, even the appropriation or the acknowledgement that there's a particular way of being in the world is also, and that a particular way of being in the world is a privileged or advantageous way of being in the world, is also the operations of privilege. It's not just something to have. Privilege arranges bodies. So those outside of its circles of proximity are also part of the architecture of privilege, because they are yearning for centrality. You're yearning to be seen. And this dialectic of recognizability, of intelligibility, of moving towards the center, the politics that is premised entirely on saving the minority still works along the lines of colonial capture. So we need something beyond inclusivity. As much as we need that, we cannot stop there. Don't let me give a keynote. Let's just stop here.
Yeah, no, beautiful. And yeah, we talk about justice plus onto shifts as central. Yeah, and I'm gonna give it to Lynn. And
Yeah,
Bayo, thank you so much.
yeah.
Shay, may the trickster deities hear our pleas.
Thank you, brother.
I'm sitting deeply with Alnoor often talks about the Holy Trinity and neoliberalism as this is our ideology, or our one of the roots of our ontology of materialism, of separation, the separation of the individual parts to whole, and rationality. And as you were describing that last story, I was feeling the vibrations of an ontology of materialism that we can't quite get through. And yeah, so I'm left with yeah, deeply stirred in many levels, and sitting with even with the piece that we were getting towards, what is money or what is disgust. I sat within myself, not just those wealth holders, which of course we could speak to that, and I almost said wealth hoarders, but I was feeling within what is the way that we can be with scarcity and hoarding, and the disgust beyond just the materialism of that, but where we are. And in that way, I want to invite us into just a few minutes of practicing onto shifts as a way of offering ourselves to this inquiry, and as a way of listening at another level for what questions or discussion may come from this collection as we move into a collective conversation. So if you'll just go on this little sojourn with me for a couple moments here, let's see what comes. Let's see how it works in the Zoomiverse. So the first invitation is just to gaze at something in your space. Anything that is in your field. And really perceive it. What do you see? And how can you use more senses than sight to perceive it? Be with what you're putting your awareness and your attention on for a moment. What relationships do you see? What's your relationship to this? Do you see it as alive? And just notice if that's outside of your realm of possibility, or that was a yes. And then take a moment to ask a question to what you've been putting your awareness and your attention on. Ask a question and notice what comes. And now turn your attention to a person or a situation or a topic or a place that you may have a relationship to as a problem or as a solution or as an inquiry. And again, let's try this in this way. Take time to perceive this. Take time to sense and really see. I know we're moving more into the mind, but we can still put our awareness there. Look around. Do you see beauty? Do you feel the disgust? What comes up? Again, notice what relationships you see. And now notice how our, what we often call dominant culture, or these thought forms in the materialist, separatist, rational world, perhaps cut or fragment what you can perceive. And just notice that for a moment. And take a moment to drop into kind of the back space of your body, like the back, almost as if you can feel like the space behind you is giving you some support. And listen with your heart or with your gut from that back place, and see if there's anything through a different way of perceiving this problem or solution of person, place, topic. From that place of heart or gut, is there anything else that comes through to perceive? Or another way may say, what's being revealed to you? And then just note if you can sense interconnectedness, or not. And if so or if not, what might you need to let go of to cultivate more of a sense of this kind of animate, interconnected, almost feel to say the weirding way of relating. And in that way, we felt to open it up. You can give your gratitude for your awareness and your attention, both to the what you observed in your space and perhaps what you were just working with in your mind, body, heart, soul complex. And in that way, we felt to open it up for some moments for a group discussion here. Questions for Bayo, questions for Alnoor or me with what came up today, or something that you've been sitting with in this inquiry. And again, today we're kind of around the gesturing towards post-capitalist realities and sense being with these fugitive epistemologies, these mutinous, explosive breakthrough fissures.
You can just your hand up on the Zoom function or type your question in, and then Laura will unmute you. So we have about 20 minutes or so for questions, and yeah, just also honoring that. So we ask, no social locating and telling us, sub theses and what have you, like, a question for the center would be great. And we have Firoz. So for those of you who don't know Firoz is the publisher and founder of Daraja Press, which is a Pan-African not-for-profit publisher that does some of the most amazing work and brings voices to and publishes amazing authors that are often marginalized. And he's the publisher of Post Capitalist Philanthropy, and is a mentor, an elder brother. And Bayo and I know Firoz separately, which is part of the entanglement. So
I knew him first, though. I knew him first.
I can easily say I knew him last of the three.
Going back to your ant story, perhaps there's another way of looking at that story, and that is to say that the pheromonic imprisonment allowed the ant to discover itself as an ant, no longer as a pheromonic prisoner. And I think looking at it that way I think it's really important, because on the ship, the slave ship, there has to be an accompaniment, but it is because of a discovery of the depth of the wound. And it is about the discovery of the extent of dehumanization that history and its continuity creates. And the solution to that is not the claim to be human, but the challenge of defining and discovering what it means to be human. Only those who have been most seriously injured, most profoundly injured, have the knowledge and capacity to even think about what it means to be human. And I think this relates to your comments about whiteness, because that was a crushing of the vast bulk of humanity into being non-humans. It's the same with patriarchy, the crushing of those who don't fit their heterosexual normality as being less than human. And it's not about, I want to be like you. It's about saying, no, we have an understanding of humanity, of what the potential for inventing what it means to be human. And I think that to me is a sort of the message that really comes back to me in that. And then just finally, this thing about money, and I think that the problem of our socialization in capitalism means that we often have the incapacity to think beyond it. And I think one of the things that John Holloway in his last book really posed well is the distinction between wealth and richness. And that actually wealth is a measure of extreme impoverishment of humanity. And that the richness that we have to rediscover lies in our ability to recognize where the wound happened and to invent what being human is about. And discovering itself is, I think, releasing from that pheromonic prison.
Thank you, brother. Thank you, big brother. Thank you so much. I have fond memories of us meeting in London and wanted to get my first book published with you. It's just fascinating. I'm just trying to rub it in so that Alnoor knows that we go way back before he came along and tried to. But thank you so much for sharing that. Yes, there is a sense in which all edges are taxes. Like they demand for us to let go of something. Like they're cosmological thresholds of some kind. All the stories, and I think these are encoded in the stories that we tell. For instance, the story of the Igbo landing of 1803, right? When they tried to get back to Africa, they didn't go back. I mean, one story is that they drowned in the water. But another story, I think much more compelling for me, is that they transformed into birds, right? That every time we try to leave edges, we have to become different. We cannot arrive intact. We cannot take our identities intact and transfer across the ocean, right? This is why Issue did something. In many senses, brother, you're right. The pheromonic carcerality allows us the luxury of identifying ourselves. It's the only thing we can do. It's the only thing that we can do within that space. It's the algorithm of the prison. We have to identify ourselves. And maybe it's a testament to today's logic that we're becoming increasingly infatuated with matters of identity. And maybe that's a sign of our increasing incarceration. That the only way the things we talk about in larger politics today are matters of identity. Who is who? How do you identify yourself? How do I conform to your notions of identity? It seems we're trapped in that, and there's no way out. But edge work edge work is like meeting the Sphinx, and the riddle of transformation that will be posed to us, the threshold is that, can you become something different? Will you let go of something? What would you pay me for me to take you over the river Styx, right? How do I take you to the other side? And yes, as well. Yes to the idea of richness and wealth. I think we're becoming slowly habituated, slowly in small homeopathic doses. We're being called to notice that Elon Musk is not all that, right? And all the captains of industry are not as well put together as we think they are. So this is already causing this mutiny, and we're finding other ways to be in the world. For me, it's being with my son. My son is this richness. Being with him is prophecy, it's ontology, it's theology, it's intellectualism, it's poetry. Like when I'm with him, I'm alive. When I'm close to my wife and my daughter and my son, that's when I come alive. Yes. Maybe that's money. That's the money in my pocket.
It's the richness.
Thank you, brother.
Thank you, Feroz, for such a learned question. I think we have, am I saying your name right? Is it Lorena? Lorena.
Thank you, dear sister. It's good to see you again. That brought up a lot for me. There's a lot to respond to here. Oh, you're off screen. Okay, I thought I could see you while I said this. I spoke recently, there you are. I spoke recently about what I call tripistemologies, particular ways of knowing that are tethered to trip, or the idea of the trip, connected to psychedelic, mind-altering, mind-disrupting substances and technologies. There's something duplicitous about trip, right? On the one hand, it's about taking a journey. Let's take a trip. On the other hand, it's also about falling, right? I tripped here. Right? There is a sense in which these technologies are being co-opted, as you rightly notice, are being tied to the stickiness of the capital. Again, the capital, when we speak about capitalism or capital, we're not just talking about money, right? In fact, I would argue that capital, at least if I saw things from the perspective of Walter Benjamin, right? Capital is more tethered to the fixity of the self, of the individual. That's the fetish of capital, right? It can't work without the individual. So there is a sense in which psychedelics disrupts these cultural technologies. They disrupt the continuity of the self. They bring actuality to virtuality. Virtuality is not just the digital. Virtuality is potentiality, is the possibility beyond. It's like the body introduced to its ecology. It's like the self meeting its pantheon, right? But we've gotten good at instrumentalizing cracks. This is what whiteness does. Whiteness doesn't just enlist Caucasians and Black people in how it matters in this game of who wins. Whiteness also polices cracks. Whiteness guards cracks. It guards the edges. It's the only way it can guarantee its continuity. So one way it does this is to insist that the thing you have to ask here is, what is this good for, right? How do you instrumentalize this psychedelic experience? How do you make it work for you? And if you read any James Hillman, when we're trying to gentrify the virtual and tie it to questions like, how does this make me a better person? How does this make me arrive or something? Then we're at the risk of falling into that same trap. Right? So it's now easy for captains of industry if I were Elon Musk, I could probably take everyone on an ayahuasca journey for Twitter to be more profitable, right? It seems par for the course today to do that. So in a sense, and this goes back to what I was saying earlier. Oh, by the way, I think I also have to say the questions that have to do with sustainability and how we survive in this world, right? I don't want to divorce them from questions of transformation, but they have their specificity, right? Questions of transformation are different. Like, how do we feed? How do we live here and now? How do we sustain ourselves? And that's something to really think about. But we also want to address the threshold, the monstrous threshold, the mouth of the monster that is open, that is insisting that if you want to shift, if you want mutiny, then you have to go through me. You're not just going to walk through on your own terms. You have to meet me and hybridize your body, right? There are going to be spaces where the two meet, right? I have been blessed in terms of speaking about these things and doing the things that I love to do and being paid for it. That's not always available to everyone, and I can acknowledge that. But it's not going to be available to me for long. I don't want it to be, right? I want to get off this screen eventually and just go and play with my son and travel across India with my daughter, right? It's not going to be, this gift is an enablement for a while. It's not my property to speak this way. I hope, and this is my prayer, my sister, that the things that exceed you, the virtual bodies, the ancestral lives, the more than human entities and agencies, that they will surround you and find you and speak with you, and you will find community to hold your hand as you walk through these thresholds, as you ask pertinent questions like, how do I live and eat and drink in a fair world? I hope they find you. And I hope they also don't leave you here in the pheromonic trail. I hope they push you. I hope your road is rough a little and it pushes you.
No more rough, please.
No, the roughness I speak of is not that kind of roughness of the flattened modernity. It's not Hamburg smoothness. That's not the other of the roughness. The roughness I'm speaking of is the roughness that comes with a maternal push. The pushing, the midwifing of a world that will be our blessing and our generosity. Yeah, I'm not exactly sure where to take it from here, but we are in this together.
Ashe, yeah, may the gods have their way with us. So we probably have time for one more question, Bayo, and there's a couple in the chat box, but I'm just going to pick one from our brother Justin in California. Justin, if you want to come up, or I can read it as you wish, but I'll read it. Do you want to go ahead? Just yeah, perfect.
Beautiful. Have you watched the Lego movie, Justin? No? Okay, go watch it. There's but you know Lego toys, right? You know the things. Everything has its place.
I've played with Lego, yeah.
You still do?
Not today, although maybe soon with my daughter. Yeah,
it's fine. Good. Oh, lovely. So the toys, they work by things sticking into other things, right? They work by it only works as a sense of fitting things into each other. It works with the appropriate, right? There's a song in the movie, Everything is Awesome, right? Everything is awesome. The protagonist sings Everything is awesome because he has his place. Nothing really dies in that world. Everything sticks like glue in the place that they're meant to be, in predetermined places. And then something happens. An explosion happens, a thematic explosion, not a literal one, but an explosion happens and they're lost, unable to situate themselves. Post-activism is this explosion that unarranges, I'm using the word unarrange, from arrange and an, that disarranges or unarranges lines of continuity and then gives birth to new imperatives as a result of that which is flashed up, okay? Cracks are crystallizations of monstrous becomings. This is how the monster forms. I wish I had the time to speak about philosophers like Gilbert Simondon and how he thinks about the individual as a continuous flow with technology, and how we are imbricated with land and technology and systems and virtualities. I wish I had time to do that. But thinking about the world in that way, there are moments when the flow does not cohere in the ways that we expect, and the explosion of disability happens. Except disability is emancipatory in the way that I think about things. Disability is not less, it's excess. So if you ask me about my dearest crack, if I could frame it that way, again, it's my son. And I think 50% of people here would know my story and my relations with my son as he is on the autistic spectrum. As I'm discovering, I am too, mildly so. But he's a lot more closer and more proximate to that explosion. In the past, in Second World War, post-Second World War, one way to address autistic nonverbal children was to lock them in the asylum, right? Cage them in, seek to rehabilitate or cure them. And then some dude called Fernand Deligny walked with them and did this Pied Piper thing and led them astray and formed communities where they could stay with the children instead of trying to rehabilitate them, but to commune with them in new ways. That's my work. That's my most profound prophetic work. It's not trying to rehabilitate my son, and I'm not going to go through the entire story of my history of trying to do that, of trying to cover the cracks, of participating in whiteness and trying to fix my son so that he can be neurotypically available for surveillance systems. Instead, my work now is to stay with him. Not that my son is the crack. The event that is remodulating our work together is the crack. And the cracks can show up differently for you. I think loss is a crack. I think the digital is a crack. I think any place that does not bend to the will of capital is a crack. Any place that inspires disgust is a crack. And every time we move towards the place, we have modernity has technologies that tells us, here's what you do here. You cover it up, you pathologize it, and you try to fix it. If we can just stay a little bit longer than usual and refrain from trying to fix or impose the stamp of the familiar on these monstrous cracks, then I think that we might notice the new and the different and the otherwise. So the first work is identify that place of failure around you in your community, right? Where something erotic is disrupting the cartography of continuity. Identify it, offer it an experimental name, and then seek ways to sit with it. You can invite others in, but I feel that's the politics we need today, to sit with cracks. There is no standardized way to do it. In my own life, in my community's life, it's my son, but it might be something different for you.
So I think Lynn is going to transition us. And well, maybe I'll just say a little something about Alixa, and we can bring Alixa up. So for those of you who do have the book, Post Capitalist Philanthropy, you'll notice Alixa's artwork is throughout it, and her fingerprints are in the book. And yeah, Lynn's holding up one of the pieces. She's Afro-Colombian artist, socialized in the West, in Turtle Island, multimedia artist. She was the co-founder of Climbing Poetry. She's been on the accompaniment with us, and is a dear sister. And she's been in a couple of the webinars and has done some weaving where she listens in and then sort of translates that into a spoken word piece. And so if we could bring Alixa up, she'll do that for us for a few moments, and then we'll leave the last 10 minutes or so to close and just tell you where we're at, and maybe if we have time, Lynn's going to read a little piece from the book to close us. But in the meantime, thank you for being with us, Alixa, and thank you, Bayo.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, and hello, beautiful souls. My name is Alixa Garcia, and I'm coming to you from the land of the Chichimex, 4 hours west of La Ciudad de Mexico. And it's a gift to share this time with Bayo, Lynn, Alnoor, and everyone here now, and those who will be tuning in the future. Hello from the past. I'm so excited to be around this particular fire and this circle. I also just want to take a moment, since this is the last webinar in the series, to say that it's been an absolute pleasure being a poetic weaver throughout the majority of the sessions. Thank you, Alnoor and Lynn, for having me and for inviting me into the book. Poetry as a liberatory practice, as spellcasting, as a conscientious spiritual and energetic agreement with the word, helps to co-manifest life in its image. And this is a powerful cauldron that has been stirred here today. And these words are begging to be spoken and poured right in. So thank you for receiving them. And just as an open invitation, you can close your eyes, you can lay on the ground, you can move your body, you can look at the screen, you can look at the ceiling. Whatever feels true for you, go with that. a message from the future. I heard a message from the future that came to me like a chorus. It sung back the following 12 verses. 1. When the poles melted, it deterritorialized humanity. It was the hurricane of consequence that left us with floodwaters for mirrors, the earthquake that erased all borders and undressed the empire, our once foolproof shield against the earth. It left us bewildered and running towards the in-between spaces in search of what we had given up for our conveniences. Turns out modernity provided no nutrients, and magic was in abundance when we turned off the lights. 2, a being set on knowing doesn't travel far. We traded mirages of certainty for a compass and found that a season of unlearning will make for a year of unearthing good soul soil. After the storms, we harvested mysteries found below the surface worth the sky entire. 3, grief is a ceremony, a site for another kind of power. It is the resacralization of sorrow in order to make room for a world beyond wholeness. What was the promise of bodies bent into question marks and underfoot? We laid on the earth and found out how we became gourds with a spout and a spot that marked the opening into something other. We emerged as open mouths in a collective ritual of unbecoming. 4, when the activist in us finally entered the home of imagination, the inconspicuous beingness once caught below the chaos began to emerge from the stillness of our returning. It awakened the remembrance of interconnectedness modernity had tried to co-opt and replace with deadlines, demands, deficiencies, all wrapped in a righteous form of doing. When the wondrous child in us put down the resistance, for the first time, we could hear a world inside, behind, and through the cracks. There, we heard the chorus of our own futures singing back to us. 5, we were born for everything that was to come. We were born for everything that was to come. 6, we learned from the oak trees. After Hurricane Katrina in the lower 9th Ward, the only thing left standing was the oak tree, because instead of digging its roots deep and solitary into the earth, it digs them wide and interlocks with surrounding oaks. Woven, they withstood the winds and the floods. Interwoven, so did we. 7, through their galactic dance, trees become storers of sunlight. In this bewildered cosmic exchange, they gift us back our closest star in measured volume, so we may experience the warmth of the universe right here inside our earth. 8, interconnected reciprocity. Paper birch trees send carbon to Douglas fir seedlings, especially when shaded in the summertime, enhancing their survivability. In spring and fall, the Douglas fir returns the favor when the birch has no leaves. Interconnected reciprocity. We learn from those who came before us about not throwing each other away. 9, life is the earth thinking out loud. Life is the earth thinking out loud. And we, as her latest creation, almost forgot her language. With every passing day, we were losing our ability to understand what life was communing about. We realized we were missing out on the most magnificent tale of all and started to listen. That's how we learned that oak trees in a forest fire stop releasing oxygen and instead release CO2 to dampen the flames around them. They taught us how to control our breathing in order to not add to the flames of conflict when they arose like a wild forest fire between us. 10, if we were to take a clock and use 24 hours as the indicator for the evolution of life up until now, and start that clock at midnight, the hours between 12 and 3 in the morning, a meteor bombardment. At around 4 a.m., the origins of life begin. By 2 in the afternoon, single-cell algae appear. Jellyfish and seaweed come out around 9 p.m. Land plants join the party at 9:52. Dinosaurs show up at almost 11 p.m. Mammals enter the stage 39 minutes later. Anatomically modern humans don't come on the scene until the last 4 seconds before the clock strikes midnight again. We are the Earth's latest act of ecstatic co-creation with the universe, a beautiful train wreck of a species. In our convenient continuity, we almost destroyed in milliseconds what has taken 24 hours, 4.4 billion years to create. 11, 99% of all life that has ever existed on Earth has gone extinct. And maybe the role of life on Earth is to die. If so, the question that begged to be asked was, as a species, how do we learn to die with dignity? Our journey into this inquiry made us good ancestors. 12. Behind the ethnographic journey towards wonder, a new cosmology cracked into existence, leaving behind the reductionist, the easy arrival, the answer worth giving. Thank you so much, friends. Thank you so much for your light and for being here.
Wow, thank you so much, Alixa.
Thank you.
Shukran. Alixa.
Yeah. It's hard to speak with such poetic weaving of worlds and words and remembrance. So we have a few moments of Chronos time to be in our Kairos time of the ending of this webinar series. And we felt to go to the place where the book ends, which is to walking into the unknown. And if you take the arc of this series or what we're working with, it's this journey that began with us looking into the pyramid logic of neoliberalism, opening up these cracks and fissures into onto shifts, into a way of imagining spiral logics that's asking us to be in responsibility for our beliefs, for the inner structures, to find our way into our relational webs, to re-entangle ourselves innerly and outerly in all of our relationships, and indeed in Gaia and Entelechy, in an ever-expanding universe. That journey, we're gesturing towards these ways of what Bayo offered us today, into the cracks, into the mutiny, into the explosions. We often see those also as the fractal, interdependent, multi-directional, self-reflexive, discursive, non-linear, non-dual ways of being. We want to continue to invoke not just emergence, but the conditions that allow us to interact with emergence in a way that allows us to be more contextually sensitive to each moment, to this moment where we are in the language that you want to use, the Kali Yuga, the meta crisis, the poly crisis, where we are in this moment with how we're finding our way and getting lost together, walking into the unknown. So we end our inquiry in this book can open to the door of mystery in a way along the way that Bayo has been inviting us to be today, with kind of a way into this spiral where we're looking at it as a surrender, control, certainty, ways of being, ways of continuing to exist in our current systems and that are ever going. We invoke surrender as a daily praxis, as a daily way of being, as a way of being with our systems, surrendering to where we are in checkmate within these systems of capitalist modernity, with these ways of being sometimes imprisoned in a materialist, rationalist, separatist way of perceiving the world within ourselves and around us. Can we surrender to where we are in this moment? And in that way, can we traverse? Can we enter our species initiation? This this way of moving into a alchemical state change. One way that we offer this notion of traverse is finding our way into liberation ontologies of our time. For those of you who know the histories of liberation theology, you know that that was a moment where the political and the spiritual came together to find a new way, to find a way to get lost and to find a way through. So we're invoking this traverse, this moment, this threshold, cross our threshold of this initiation, and to find our way to re-enter the continuum of life and death, to re-enter a relationship with life force itself. And I'm going to pass it to Alnoor to see what he would want to add to this, in a way, provocation and meditation of surrender, traverse, and re-enter. And he's going to bring in a myth that's been helping us find our way in what we often call this age of consequence.
Thank you, Lynn. Yeah, for those of you who have had a chance to go through the book, you know it starts with the mythopoetic prologue, the story of Osiris, who in many ways is one of the most relevant deities and gods of our time. He becomes the god of the day of judgment, and not in the Christian monotheistic sense, but in the sense of the higher self deciding what it stands for and what it stands against. And then we close the book with a mythopoetic epilogue, and it's the story of Inanna. And actually, Bayo had a big influence on this. He read an early draft of the book, and he said, "You need more mythopoetics." And Lynn had actually just said, maybe 10 minutes before Bayo's voice note, that you want to bring in the story of Osiris, and I want to bring in the story of Inanna. So let's bring them both in. And so for those of you who know the story of Inanna, the epic poem is called The Descent of Inanna, and it's from circa 3,500 years BCE, and was one of the founding myths of Babylonian and Sumerian culture. And she's the god of heaven and earth. And she's at war with her sister, who's the god of the underworld, Ershkigal. And Ershkigal's husband dies while she's pregnant. And Inanna decides to visit her sister and make the funerary procession. And so as she enters the underworld, her sister is very unhappy to see her. You know, it's the dualism of you're coming from the above world, the world of light and day, and you don't belong here. And so she has to ceremonially undress and let go of the things she holds dearest: her robes, her jewelry, her identity, her ego, her constructs, her certainty, her entitlements, even her victimhood. And after she does this, her sister does not grant her access. You know, it's not that she does the sort of ceremonial sacrifice and is granted access to the eternal world. She's put on a meat hook and hung for 3 days. And there's some trickery involved. And Inanna, before she entered, had made a deal with Enki, the father god, who sent what are sometimes referred to as demons, but the Gala, and they came and they negotiated with Ershkigal, and they said, "What do you need?" And she said, "Help me with my labor," as she was giving birth, and she was helped with her labor. And then Ershkigal says, "What can I give you back?" And they said, "Give us Inanna's body." And in good trickster fashion, they took that body and brought it back to the earth plane. And she then becomes initiated and resurrected as the god of not just heaven and earth, but the underworld itself. And so she integrates all three domains. And we find this myth very poignant for our times, especially when we think about money and capitalism and post-capitalism and capitalist modernity, that this initiation that we're going through requires the integration of shadow and light, not just bypassing and being in the, the ascension narrative or in the collapse narrative, but something more non-dualistic and messy and complex and entangled. Yeah, and in that sense, we leave you with that and with the uncertainty and the beauty and the promise and the peril and the poison and the nectar of uncertainty and not knowing. So thank you all, and I think Lynn is going to say one more thing.
Yeah, I was just going to read a couple lines from the very end of this book. As a way, we opened all of this with a prayer, and these lines are a prayer and a provocation. So as we embrace the paradox and abandon the addiction of certainty, entitlement, and control, may we see that alternatives outside of the false binaries offered by capitalist modernity have always been with us. As we take seriously the fierce urgency of now, may we access a continuum of time that opens possibilities of radical restoration and transformation. The harbinger of post-capitalist realities may be as simple as laying one's forehead upon the naked earth in contemplation of the liberation of all beings. It may also require discarding the weight and burden of accumulated wealth while holding the same liberatory intention. How far we go may depend on how far each of us are willing to go, how much each of us is willing to open and surrender as entangled knots in a greater tapestry. Imagine we created a reality where we only engage in activities that create conditions for the emergence of beauty, life force, and enchantment. What if we created a context in which the will and entelechy of all beings could manifest with full sovereignty? What would a world look like where we envision the consequences of our actions of 200 or 500, even thousands of years into the future, and only then created our contribution to our descendant societies as if we were them? Rather than vocations or purpose, what would happen if we asked the living world how to best use our life force in service to its desired unfolding?
Thank you, Lynn. And I know we're a couple of minutes over, and I wanted to, maybe we can bring Bayo back up, and Alixa and Firoz, maybe Adam and Laura as well, and to say thank you to Laura, who's been producing and gifting us her time. She works with Education for Racial Equity and is a dear, dear sister. So Laura, you can put yourself up as well if you want. And Adam, who's the research fellow, and his hands are all over the book as well. And to thank all the previous speakers. There's Laura, there's Adam. So Dr. Vandana Shiva and Dr. Rupa Maria, Teokas and Ghost Horse, Vanessa Andreotti, Pat McCabe, Ashish Kotari, Marai Larasi, And then today, our dear brother, Bayo Akomolafe, and Alixa Garcia, who's been with us on this beautiful journey. And yeah, sending you all deep, deep gratitude and shukran, in the sense of there is no agency and no you to thank, but not the cosmic entanglement and the conspiracy of forces that bring us together to do this work in a time of crisis. And if the six of you want to stay on, and maybe we could bring Feroz on as well, and to thank Feroz and Daraja Press for publishing the book, and all his wisdom and counsel, and to Andrea Panaritis and the Reynolds Foundation for, yeah, Andrea was our muse, let's say, and the initiator of the book, and continues to be. So if we could bring Feroz on as well, and maybe the six of us could stay on for a few minutes, and to the rest of you, yeah, we bid you farewell for now. And shukran. We'll see you all soon, inshallah.